Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Here we are again for another episode of the Near Memo with me and Mike and David, and we're talking about search, social, and commerce. This is fabulous episode 65, remarkably. And of course, as always, there's a lot that's happening, but we're going to only focus in on three major developments this week. For the rest of what's happened, check out our newsletter and please subscribe if you haven't. Leading off today, we have some very, very sad news about Bill Slawski, sort of beloved member of the SEO community who passed away. And Mike, you wanted to say some stuff about that.
Sure. Just guy was instrumental in my engagement with local in 2007, 2008. He and I and Matt McGee would spend hours every weekend looking at search results and theorizing how they worked. And he would share with me local patents. And I remember this blog post I did with him where sort of a SNL takeoff where I would argue pro and he would argue con about whether local at Google was ever going to make it. He took the position that they just weren't good enough at aggregating data. I took the position that there was so much financial interest in making it work both on Google's side and on the side of the business that ultimately it would work good enough. And it was one of these, we intentionally slung mud at each other to see how much interest we could get in the ongoing discussion. And I went back and David responded to the posts as well. And, he's been somebody who, while I know him professionally, I don't really know him personally. But he's always been very generous with his professional time. He spoke at Local U. He would answer, whenever I had a question about a patent, he would go and look up which patents it might apply to. He was very generous with his time. And, he had a stroke several months ago. I don't quite remember. And the folks in Local got together and we sent him DoorDashes regularly just so he would not have to go out and shop. I don't know what he died of, but I know he had been struggling with recovery from that. And he'll be missed, and I'll miss him. And it's, we're in a time of sort of national mourning, and now we have this on top of it. So it just reminds me that life is transient, life is fragile, and you need to appreciate the people around you when you can. And you need to tell them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I didn't know Bill very well, but I'd had contact with him for many years. He used to be a contributor to Search Engine Land when I started, 15 years ago. And so we had contact informally that way. And I just always found him to be a person of tremendous integrity and depth and authenticity. He was just really just a good person. And so I haven't had contact with him very much in the last few years, but very sad that he's gone. And I know based on the Twitter responses that there were a lot of people who he touched and who also feel the same way. And I just wanted to echo your sentiment, Mike, about, appreciating people, and life is very, very short and things can happen at any time suddenly. And suddenly somebody's gone. And so it's just, you have to really appreciate what you've got while you've got it.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's some way to better memorialize him than Twitter stream. I mean, I get that people are mourning, and this is how we know each other is through Twitter to a large extent. But
it's kind of horrible. It's kind of horrible, the way that I don't want to critique Twitter. This is just sort of the world we're living in. But it's just I agree. It's kind of not entirely appropriate in some sense.
So Barry Schwartz, when Bill had his stroke, however many months ago that was, 9 months ago, a year ago, Barry Schwartz put together a sort of tribute site to Bill, which I think is really nice. And that's, I hope, is going to be sort of permanently archived. And hopefully Bill got a chance to, see a lot of the same comments that are now posted on Twitter in more depth while he was alive. So that's somewhat heartening. I think that in terms of an ongoing sort of memorial, it might be worth the three of us reaching out and seeing what we can sort of drum up with Barry's help, given that was sort of his project, is kind of one thought I had. Mike, I'm heartened to know that I'm in good company as someone who's lost a bet or two to you in terms of being on the wrong side of history. If that puts me in Bill's court, I'm happy to be there.
Good company.
Yeah, for
Well,
sure. And I just wanted to echo your thoughts just around, I don't think I discovered Bill's writing maybe and research quite as early in my SEO career as you did. It was maybe a little bit later on, but certainly one of the. I mean, I can remember reading his blog posts on those local patents and certainly helped me understand the concept of citations, which sort of drove a lot of my early success in the industry. I think his couldn't agree more in terms of his generosity and kindness in person. Was terrific to have him keynote one of our earlier local U events, in the early teens or whatever we're calling that decade. And I can remember my first PubCon in probably 2008 or so, and I was totally a nobody. I was just a regular attendee, hadn't spoken anywhere or anything, and he and Kim Krausberg as well, sort of just they were going out to a restaurant or something for dinner, and they just invited me to come along, and I got to meet two incredibly smart, kind people in the space and talk with them for hours, and it was really just certainly there's plenty of people in our space who would not have who would not have had time or interest in that sort of thing, and Bill was not one of them. Bill was a really generous guy and a really smart guy, and certainly I remember feeling something similar with the news of Eric Ward's passing several years ago now, but two of the real sort of original thinkers and people who were really generous with their knowledge, and hope that those of us who are still around in the industry can kind of live up to their examples moving forward and continue to share what we know, and hope that helps others in their careers and make sense of what's happening in the world of search.
For sure.
Yeah, his patent discoveries or uncovered the local patent largely informed that research we did in 2008, large-scale research we did around ranking factors and correlations, and largely informed my understanding of the work we did there on top of, which was practical assessments on top of the patent, really informed the first, until the knowledge graph came out in 2012, it sort of was the operating structure. And still, that structure that he uncovered became the knowledge graph to a large extent, right? Mm-hmm. The things that patent talked about became what effectively was the core of the original knowledge graph in terms of how Google tracked all of these things. And so it was very instrumental in my career and life. And
in fairness to
he
Bill,
will be missed. He will be missed.
He will be missed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a sort of a final note, in fairness to Bill, in your early debate about the future of local and Google's ownership of that, in the very, very early days, in the early 2000s, it was very hard to see Google having great success because they didn't have access to the small business data, to the local data. And while they were a very powerful technology company, there were others that were much better positioned than them in terms of the information. So Bill was not completely, out of line in his thinking. I mean, it's only through hindsight and your incredibly prescient, kind of view, time traveling view
also,
that you
though,
could have.
The same economic factors that I talked about was what led to so much and leads to so much spam that we deal with, right? Yeah. I mean, it's the same side of, or it's the other side of the coin that we deal with every day that Google has never wanted to confront. The way Google resolved the lack of local data was they stole it from the super pages.
Well, they had yeah, that's a whole other discussion. They had deals with those companies. I mean, you could argue that Google's early relationships with what they called their I forget what they called them actually. They would call them partners.
Data providers,
these many companies that fed local data into Google did so because of Google's preeminence in consumer-facing search, and it was really sort of a quasi-monopoly power move. Google could extract the value that these companies had because they were the distribution point. And if you didn't do a deal with Google, then maybe you weren't going to get the traffic or the exposure that you needed in order to continue to monetize. But that's another conversation. Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.